Margaret Foster stood in my driveway screaming that my home office violated HOA covenants and she'd shut down my contracting business if it was the last thing she did. What she didn't know, and what I was about to show the county building department, was that I had 247 pages of signed change orders from 2015 when I built her house. Change orders where she'd personally approved cutting structural supports to make her master bedroom bigger, where she'd demanded I skip foundation inspections to stay on schedule, where she'd signed off on electrical work she knew wasn't up to code because hiring a licensed electrician was too expensive. Every signature was hers. Every violation was documented. Every crime she'd forced me to commit to save her money was about to become her legal nightmare. But let me take you back to where this really started. 10 years ago, in June 2015, when I was a younger contractor desperate for work, and Margaret Foster was a demanding client who wanted a custom home built on a budget that didn't match her vision. If you want to see what happens when an HOA president attacks the contractor who built her house, hit that subscribe button right now. What would you do if someone tried to destroy your business after forcing you to break building codes for them? Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from, because this story proves that documentation saves lives and destroys people who think they can rewrite history. My name is Daniel Cooper. I'm 47 years old, and I've been a licensed general contractor in Tennessee for 25 years. I started my career at 22, fresh out of a construction management program, working as a framer for a big residential builder in Nashville. Spent 5 years learning the trade from the ground up, literally. Framing houses, pouring foundations, running electrical, doing finish carpentry. Everything you need to know to build a home, right? I got my general contractor's license when I was 27 and started my own company, Cooper Construction. For the first decade, it was just me and a rotating crew of subcontractors, electricians, plumbers, HVAC specialists. I built custom homes for middle-class families in suburban Nashville, the kind of work where you shake hands with clients and their kids help pick out paint colors. Honest work, good work. By 2015, I'd built 47 houses, had a reputation for quality craftsmanship and finishing on schedule. But the housing market was still recovering from 2008, and competition was brutal. Big builders were undercutting everyone, squeezing small contractors like me. I needed every project I could get. That's when Margaret Foster called. She'd just gone through a divorce, gotten a substantial settlement, and wanted to build her dream home in Willow Creek Estates, a new subdivision in Franklin, Tennessee, about 20 miles south of Nashville. Nice area, good schools, the kind of neighborhood where HOAs enforce strict aesthetic standards and the property values matter more than neighborliness. Margaret had very specific ideas about what she wanted: 5 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, gourmet kitchen, master suite with sitting area, 3-car garage. She showed me magazine photos, Pinterest boards, HGTV screenshots. Her vision was beautiful. Her budget was $420,000. I did the math. For what she wanted in that location, with quality materials and proper construction, the realistic cost was $550,000 minimum. I told her that in our first meeting. "I can't spend that much," Margaret said, sitting across from me in my office with her architect's drawings spread across the desk. "I've already bought the lot. I've already committed to this neighborhood. You need to make it work for $420,000. I should have walked away right there. Should have told her to find another contractor or scale back her vision. But I was 39 years old, had 2 kids in college, and needed the work. I thought I could make it work. Thought I could find ways to cut costs without cutting corners on safety or code compliance. I was wrong. The project started in June 2015. Foundation poured, framing began, everything moving smoothly. Then the change orders started. Change order number 1 came 3 weeks into framing. Margaret wanted to expand the master bedroom by 4 feet to accommodate a larger sitting area. That meant moving a load-bearing wall, which meant recalculating the structural supports, which meant additional engineering. "Can't you just move the wall without all that extra work?" Margaret asked when I showed her the engineering costs. "It's just moving one wall." "It's a load-bearing wall, Margaret. It holds up the second floor. We need proper support beams rated for the load, and an engineer needs to sign off on it." "How much is that going to cost?" $8,500 for the engineering and materials. Her face went tight. "That's ridiculous. Just use bigger boards or something. Nobody's going to check once the walls are up. I explained that it didn't work that way, that building codes exist for safety, that cutting corners on structural elements was dangerous and illegal. She didn't want to hear it. Daniel, I hired you because you said you could build this house for $420,000. Now you're telling me every little change is going to cost thousands more? Either make it work within budget or I'll find someone who will. That threat hung in the air between us. I thought about my 2 kids' college tuition bills, thought about the 3 projects that had fallen through in the past 6 months because bigger builders had undercut my bids, thought about how badly I needed this contract to work. I made a mistake. I used support beams that were technically adequate for the load, but not to the specification an engineer would require. I moved the wall, expanded her bedroom, and didn't file for the engineering review. Margaret signed the change order. I have her signature, but I'm the licensed contractor. The responsibility was mine. Change order number 7 came during rough-in phase. The county inspector was scheduled to check framing, electrical rough-in, and plumbing before we closed up the walls. Standard procedure on every house. 3 days before the inspection, Margaret called me in a panic. Daniel, I'm $15,000 over budget on the kitchen cabinets. Custom Italian marble countertops cost more than I expected. I need to cut costs somewhere. Can we skip the inspection? No, the county requires inspections before we close walls. It's not optional. What if we just don't schedule it? What if we close the walls and they never know? My architect already reviewed everything. You've built 47 houses. You know what you're doing. I explained that the county tracks permits, that inspections are mandatory, that skipping them was illegal and would void her insurance. She listened with the tight-lipped expression of someone who'd already made up their mind. Here's what I think, Margaret said, her voice taking on that tone wealthy clients use when they're about to demand something unreasonable. These inspections are just bureaucracy that costs me time and money. So, let's skip this inspection, close up the walls, and move forward. I'll sign whatever paperwork you need saying I approved it. Margaret, I can't do that. It's against the law. Is it against the law if I'm the homeowner asking you to do it? If I sign a document taking responsibility? She didn't understand, or pretended not to, that my license was on the line, that the county could fine me, that I could face criminal charges. But she was persuasive, and she was right that I'd built 47 houses, that I knew the work was solid, that the inspector would probably just glance at everything and check boxes anyway. I made another mistake. I rescheduled the inspection for 2 weeks later, claiming we weren't ready. Then I closed up the walls. We forgot to reschedule. Margaret signed a change order acknowledging the decision. The inspection never happened. Change order. Number 23 came during roof framing. The structural plans called for 2x10 rafters on 16-inch centers with hurricane ties rated for 120 miles per hour winds. Tennessee gets severe storms, and proper roof structure is critical. Margaret looked at the lumber bill and balked. Why do the rafters need to be so expensive? Can't we use smaller ones? The engineer specified 2x10 seconds for the span and load requirements. Going smaller compromises the structural integrity. But smaller rafters would save me $6,000, and we're not in a hurricane zone. Why do I need hurricane-rated ties? Because Tennessee gets severe thunderstorms with straight-line winds that can exceed 80 miles per hour. The ties keep your roof from lifting off the house. She stared at the numbers on the estimate. $6,000 is a lot of money for wind that might never happen. Use 2x8 rafters and regular ties. I'll sign off on it. Margaret, I can't. Yes, you can. You're the contractor. You make the decisions. I'm giving you permission to use more economical materials. Nobody inspects attics after the house is finished. This is between you and me. I should have walked away right there. Should have told her to find another contractor. But I was already $180,000 into the project with another $240,000 to go. Walking away meant eating the costs of work already done, meant potentially being sued for breach of contract, meant losing the biggest project I'd had in 2 years. So I used 2x8 rafters and standard ties, saved her $6,000, compromised the structural integrity of her roof, and got her signature on the change order. By the time we finished in March 2016, I had 247 pages of change orders. Every single one documented a decision Margaret had made to save money or skip steps. Some were minor, substituting cheaper fixtures, eliminating decorative elements. But others were serious: structural compromises, skipped inspections, unlicensed workers, unpermitted modifications. I told myself I was documenting everything to protect myself, that if anything ever came back on me, I'd have proof she'd approved these decisions. But the truth was simpler and darker. I was a contractor who'd compromised his principles because he was afraid of the financial consequences of doing the right thing. Margaret moved into her dream home in April 2016, paid me the final $42,000, left a 5-star review on Yelp and Google, and referred me to 2 of her friends from the country club. She hosted a housewarming party where she showed off the custom Italian marble countertops and the expanded master suite. For 8 years, I heard nothing from her. The house stood, nothing collapsed. The roof stayed on through thunderstorms. The violations stayed hidden behind closed walls and finished surfaces. I thought I'd gotten away with it. Thought the mistakes I'd made in 2015 were buried in the past, that the statute of limitations on my conscience had expired. Then Margaret Foster became HOA President in January 2024, and my past came back to haunt me. The Willow Creek Estates HOA had always been active under the previous president, a retired dentist named Dr. Patricia Walsh, who'd focused on practical matters, keeping the community pool maintained, organizing an annual 4th of July barbecue, mediating disputes between neighbors over tree branches and property lines. Normal suburban HOA business. Margaret took over as president in January 2024 and immediately transformed the organization. Within her first month, she'd rewritten half the community standards, expanded the compliance committee from 3 members to 7, and implemented a new violation reporting system that encouraged residents to photograph and document their neighbors' infractions. By the end of March 2024, she'd issued 67 violation notices to 34 different homeowners. Mrs. Chen received a notice because her grass measured 3.2 inches instead of the maximum allowed 3 inches. The Robertsons got cited for having a basketball hoop visible from the street, technically allowed under the covenants, but Margaret claimed it violated aesthetic standards. The Patterson family received a warning for leaving their children's bicycles in the driveway overnight. She established patrol hours, driving through the neighborhood taking photos with a professional camera. She created a violation spreadsheet tracking every infraction, every warning, every fine. She sent monthly newsletters highlighting compliance improvements, with before and after photos of yards that had been corrected. The neighborhood Facebook group, which had previously been a place to share recommendations for plumbers and organize babysitting co-ops, became a battleground. Some residents supported Margaret's property value protection efforts. Others called her a tyrant. Arguments erupted over whether enforcing grass height to the 1/10 of an inch was reasonable governance or authoritarian overreach. I'd moved into Willow Creek Estates in 2019, buying a modest 3-bedroom house 3 streets over from Margaret's place. The location was convenient. Most of my current clients were in Franklin and surrounding areas, and having a local address helped with credibility when bidding on projects. I ran Cooper Construction from a converted bedroom that served as my office, computer, printer, filing cabinets, and a desk where I prepared bids, reviewed plans, and coordinated with subcontractors, all perfectly legal under Tennessee zoning laws, which explicitly permit home-based professional offices that don't generate client traffic or employ on-site staff. My work truck, a 2018 Ford F-250 with Cooper Construction lettered on the doors, parked in my driveway like it had for 5 years. Like dozens of other contractors, plumbers, electricians, and service professionals in the neighborhood, who all parked work vehicles at their homes. Margaret's first violation notice arrived in my mailbox on April 12, 2024. The letter stated that my commercial construction business operating from residential property violated HOA Covenant 12C, which prohibited commercial or industrial operations that generate excessive traffic, noise, or disruption to neighborhood character. I called her that afternoon. Margaret, I run an office from home. No clients visit, no employees work here, no materials stored. This is a standard home-based business that's completely legal. You have a commercial vehicle with advertising parked in your driveway, she said, her voice clipped and professional. That's commercial signage visible from the street, which violates our aesthetic standards. It's a work truck. I'm a contractor. I need a vehicle to get to job sites. Half the neighborhood has work vehicles. Those are personal vehicles used for work. Your truck has your company name painted on it. That's commercial advertising. Margaret, Tennessee law explicitly protects home-based businesses as long as they don't create disruption. The HOA covenants can't supersede state law. Mr. Cooper, I've reviewed the covenants with our attorney. We have the right to regulate commercial activity that impacts neighborhood character. You'll be receiving a formal notice within 30 days. She hung up before I could respond. I contacted a real estate attorney, Jennifer Morrison from Morrison & Associates, who specialized in HOA disputes. She reviewed my situation and confirmed what I already knew. You're operating a legitimate home-based professional office, Jennifer said. No client traffic, no employees, no inventory, no disruption. Tennessee specifically protects this under commercial activity exemptions. The HOA can't prohibit it. And they definitely can't prohibit you from parking a work vehicle in your own driveway. So, what do? Respond to the violation notice in writing. Cite the relevant Tennessee statutes. Keep copies of everything. If they fine you, don't pay it. If they try to place a lien on your property, we'll fight it in court. But honestly, most HOAs back down once they realize they don't have legal standing. Most HOAs weren't run by Margaret Foster. 3 weeks later, the formal notice arrived. HOA complaint filed. Hearing scheduled for May 20th, 2024. $250 fine, pending unless I ceased all commercial operations within 30 days. The hearing took place in the community clubhouse. Margaret sat at the head table with 6 board members. About 15 residents attended, some supporting Margaret's property value protection efforts. Others there because they were tired of her enforcement crusade and saw me as a test case. Margaret presented her complaint. Photos of my truck parked in the driveway. Copies of my business website showing I operated Cooper Construction, serving Middle Tennessee. A printed covenant excerpt about commercial activity. Mr. Cooper is running a construction company from his residence, Margaret said. He coordinates projects, manages subcontractors, and advertises his services. That's commercial business, not a home office. And his visible commercial vehicle is advertising that violates our community standards. I presented my defense. Tennessee statutes protecting home-based professional offices. Photos of 6 other work vehicles in the neighborhood. HVAC trucks, plumbing vans, electrician vehicles, none of which had received violation notices. My business license showing I was properly registered and operating legally. I coordinate projects from a desk, I said. I don't have customers coming here. I don't have employees working here. I don't generate noise, traffic, or any disruption. This is exactly what Tennessee law defines as a protected home-based business. The board members asked questions. How many hours a week did I work from home? Did I ever have business meetings at the house? Had any neighbors complained about disruption? The answers were about 20 hours, no, and no. Board member Rachel Kim spoke up. Margaret, we have 7 other residents with work vehicles parked at their homes. Why are we targeting Daniel specifically? Because he's running a full construction company, not just parking a work vehicle, Margaret said. There's a difference between a plumber who parks his van at home and someone coordinating multiple construction projects. But legally, there's no difference, Tom Henderson, the treasurer, said. Jennifer Morrison is right. Tennessee law protects professional home offices. We can't prohibit this. The board voted 5-2 to dismiss the violation. Margaret and one other board member voted to uphold it. I'd won. But Margaret's face as the vote was announced told me this wasn't over. Her jaw was tight, her hands gripping her pen hard enough that her knuckles were white. She'd lost control, lost a vote, lost face in front of the community. People like Margaret don't accept losing gracefully. Over the next 4 months, Margaret escalated systematically, each action more aggressive than the last. In June, she filed a complaint with the Davidson County Zoning Office, claiming I was operating a construction yard from my residential property. The zoning officer, Brad Matthews, came out to investigate. He looked at my home office setup, desk, computer, filing cabinet, phone, and dismissed the complaint in 30 minutes. You're running a paper business from home, Brad told me as he completed his inspection form. No materials, no equipment, no employees, completely legal. Tell your HOA president to stop wasting county resources. In July, Margaret organized her petition. She went door to door collecting signatures demanding I relocate my business. She framed it as protecting property values, claiming my commercial operation was causing home values to decline. She got 23 signatures out of 140 homes in the neighborhood. Most people signed just to get her to stop knocking on their door. Mrs. Chen told me later that Margaret had visited her house 5 different times over 2 weeks, each visit lasting longer than the previous one, each conversation more insistent that signing was the right thing for the community. The petition went nowhere legally. You can't petition away someone's legal rights, but it gave Margaret ammunition to claim community support for her crusade. In early August, Margaret showed up at my house on a Saturday morning at 8 a.m. I was in my driveway loading materials into my truck for a client project in Brentwood, lumber, tools, safety equipment. She pulled up in her BMW, clipboard already in hand. "Mr. Cooper, I need to inspect your home office to verify you're complying with fire safety regulations." I set down the 2x4s I was loading. "Margaret, you don't have authority to inspect my home. As HOA President, I have a responsibility to ensure all residents are meeting safety standards. If you're running a business from your home, I need to verify you have proper fire extinguishers, smoke detectors, and emergency exits. That's not your responsibility. That's the fire marshal's job, and I'm not letting you into my house." Her face flushed. "You're refusing a reasonable safety inspection?" "I'm refusing an unauthorized search by someone with no legal authority. If you want to inspect my home, get a warrant. I will find a way to shut you down, Daniel. I promise you that." "Is that a threat?" "It's a statement of fact," she said, turning sharply and walking back to her BMW. She sat there for a moment, writing something on her clipboard before driving away. That conversation should have warned me how far she was willing to push this. But I was still operating under the assumption that reason would eventually prevail, that Margaret would realize she couldn't bully someone who was operating legally. I didn't understand yet that for Margaret, this had stopped being about HOA compliance. This had become personal. I'd challenged her authority. I'd won a vote against her. I'd refused to back down. And for someone who'd spent the last 8 months establishing absolute control over the neighborhood, my resistance was intolerable. On August 23, 2024, Margaret filed her nuclear option, a civil lawsuit against the Willow Creek Estates HOA board itself. She wasn't suing me directly. Her attorney had probably advised that such a lawsuit would be dismissed immediately, since I was operating legally. Instead, she sued the HOA board, claiming they were failing their fiduciary duty by allowing my illegal commercial operation to continue despite documented resident complaints and clear covenant violations. The lawsuit named every board member individually: Tom Henderson, Rachel Kim, David Park, Carol Jensen, and Michael Torres. 5 volunteers who'd given their time to manage community affairs were now facing personal legal liability because they had refused to violate my rights. The lawsuit demanded the board either force me to close my business or face damages for the decline in property values Margaret claimed my presence was causing. She was seeking $50,000 in compensatory damages plus attorney fees. Over the next 4 months, she escalated systematically. She filed complaints with the county zoning office claiming I was operating a construction yard from my home. The zoning officer came out, saw my home office setup, a desk, computer, filing cabinet, and phone, and dismissed the complaint within 30 minutes. No materials stored, no clients visiting, no employees working on site. Completely legal. Margaret wasn't deterred. She organized a petition signed by 23 neighbors demanding I relocate my business. I found out later that most of them had signed just to get her to stop bothering them. Mrs. Chen, 3 doors down, told me Margaret had knocked on her door 5 times in 2 weeks, each time with a longer explanation of why my commercial operation was destroying property values. In July, Margaret showed up at my house at 8 a.m. on a Saturday morning, clipboard in hand, demanding to inspect my home office to verify I wasn't violating fire codes. I was in my driveway loading supplies into my truck for a client project. "Margaret, you have no authority to inspect my home. As HOA President, I have a responsibility to ensure all residents are complying with safety regulations. You're not a fire marshal. You're not a building inspector. You're a volunteer HOA president with no legal authority to enter my home." Her face flushed red. "I will find a way to shut you down, Daniel. I promise you that." "Is that a threat?" "It's a guarantee," she said, turning on her heel and walking back to her BMW. That conversation should have warned me how far she was willing to go. But I was still thinking like a reasonable person dealing with an unreasonable neighbor. I hadn't yet realized I was dealing with someone who viewed opposition as a personal insult requiring total destruction. In August 2024, Margaret filed a civil lawsuit. Not against me directly, that would have been straightforward to defend. Instead, she sued the Willow Creek Estates HOA board, claiming they were failing their fiduciary duty by allowing my illegal commercial operation to continue despite resident complaints. She demanded the board either force me to close my business or face personal liability for the decline in property values she claimed my presence was causing. The lawsuit named every board member individually. Tom Henderson, the treasurer who'd been on the board for 8 years and just wanted to maintain the community pool. Rachel Kim, the secretary who organized the annual neighborhood barbecue. 5 good people who'd volunteered their time to manage a suburban HOA were now facing a lawsuit because they'd refused to violate my legal rights. Tom called me the day he received the legal notice. "Daniel, I'm sorry. Margaret is forcing the board to either shut you down or fight a lawsuit we can't afford." "Tom, you know I'm operating legally." "I know, but Margaret has already spent $8,000 on this lawsuit. She's represented by a real estate litigation firm from Nashville. Our HOA attorney is saying we either need to settle or spend tens of thousands defending ourselves. The board is considering asking you to voluntarily relocate your business just to make this go away." I felt that familiar pressure, the same pressure I'd felt in 2015 when Margaret had demanded I cut corners to stay within budget. The pressure to compromise, to back down, to let someone else win because fighting was too expensive and too risky. But this time was different. This time, I wasn't a 39-year-old contractor desperate for work. I was 47, financially stable, and absolutely done with being bullied by people like Margaret Foster. "Tom, don't settle. I'll take care of this." "What are you going to do?" Something I should have done 8 years ago. That weekend, I drove to the storage unit where I keep old project files, found the box labeled Foster Residence, 2015 to 2016. Pulled out the 3-ring binder with 247 pages of change orders. I spent Sunday afternoon at my kitchen table reviewing every page. My wife Sarah brought me coffee and asked what I was doing. "Reading history," I said. Margaret Foster's history of forcing contractors to break building codes. Sarah had heard about Margaret's lawsuit. She'd been worried about the legal costs, about whether we'd have to relocate, about what this fight would do to my business reputation. Now she looked at the binder and understood. "Are you sure you want to do this?" she asked. "You'll be exposing your own violations." "I know, but I can't let her destroy good people on the HOA board while she's sitting in a house built on fraud. And maybe I need to finally face consequences for what I did in 2015. Monday morning, I called the Davidson County Building Department and asked to meet with Chief Building Inspector Robert Harrison. Robert and I had worked together on dozens of projects over the years. He knew my reputation for quality work. He also knew I wouldn't request a meeting without a serious reason. We met Tuesday afternoon in his office at the county building. I brought the binder of change orders and a 3-page summary I'd written documenting the major violations in Margaret's house. Robert listened as I explained everything. The 2015 build, Margaret's demands to cut costs, the inspections we'd skipped, the structural compromises, the electrical work done by unlicensed contractors, every violation documented with her signature. When I finished, Robert sat back in his chair and studied me. "Daniel, you understand what you're telling me means your license is at risk." "I understand." "You could face fines, suspension, possibly permanent revocation depending on what we find." "I know. You could face criminal charges if any of these violations created genuine safety hazards." "I know that too." "Then why are you here?" I thought about that question. Why was I willing to sacrifice my career, my reputation, potentially my freedom to expose Margaret's violations? Because 8 years ago, I made a choice to compromise my principles because I was afraid of the consequences of doing the right thing, I said. I've been carrying that weight ever since. Every house I build, I think about those violations in Margaret's house. Every client who trusts me, I wonder if they'd trust me if they knew what I'd done. And now, Margaret is using the legal system to destroy people's lives while benefiting from the same violations she's using as weapons. That's not right, and I'm done being afraid. Robert flipped through the binder, pausing on certain pages. Change order number 12, reduce foundation footings. Change order number 18, unlicensed electrical work. Change order number 23, substandard roof trusses. He looked up. These are serious violations. I know, and she signed everyone. That doesn't absolve you of responsibility. You're the licensed professional. I know. Robert closed the binder. I'm going to need time to review this. I'll have to coordinate with the fire marshal, the electrical inspector, possibly a structural engineer. If we move forward with an inspection, it's going to be comprehensive. Everything opens up, every wall, every system, every corner of that house. Whatever you need to do. And Daniel? Once I start this investigation, I can't protect you from the consequences. You'll face the licensing board. You'll face fines. You might face worse. I understand. Robert stood and offered his hand. Takes courage to do what you're doing. Stupid, probably, but courageous. I shook his hand. Sometimes courage and stupidity look the same until you see how it turns out. 3 weeks later, on October 15th, 2024, Robert Harrison and a team of county inspectors arrived at Margaret Foster's house with an inspection warrant. Building inspector, electrical inspector, fire marshal, and a structural engineer Robert had contracted to evaluate the foundation and framing. I wasn't there. Robert had explicitly told me to stay away, but I got text updates from Tom Henderson, who watched from his yard as the inspection unfolded. They've been inside for 2 hours. Margaret is standing in the front yard with her attorney. They just brought in equipment to scan the walls, looking for studs and electrical. The structural engineer is in the attic taking photos. Margaret is crying. Her attorney is on the phone. 3.5 hours after the inspection started, Robert called me. Daniel, you need to come to the county office tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Bring your attorney. How bad? Worse than your change orders indicated. We found violations you didn't document. This house is a disaster. The next morning, I sat in Robert's office with my attorney, Michael Reeves, and reviewed the preliminary inspection report. It was 47 pages. The violations I documented were there. Undersized support beams in the master bedroom, inadequate foundation footings throughout, roof trusses not to specification. But the inspectors had found additional problems I hadn't known about. The unlicensed electrician Margaret had hired to finish faster had created fire hazards in 3 rooms, wiring not to code, junction boxes improperly installed, circuit breakers undersized for the electrical load. The fire marshal had identified 6 separate violations that created genuine risk of electrical fire. The plumbing work had been installed without proper permits. The inspector found ventilation issues in the master bathroom that violated code and could lead to mold and structural water damage. Most damning, the inspectors had discovered Margaret had done additional unpermitted work after moving in. She'd finished her basement in 2018, adding a bedroom and bathroom without pulling permits. The bedroom violated egress requirements, no proper window for emergency exit. The bathroom's electrical work was dangerous, with outlets too close to water sources and improper GFCI protection. In 2020, she'd converted part of her 3-car garage into a home gym, removing a fire-rated wall required by building code. The conversion was completely unpermitted. Robert looked at me across his desk. The house we inspected yesterday isn't just improperly built. It's been improperly modified multiple times. Some of this is on you from 2015, but most of this is on her from the last 8 years. What happens now? I'm issuing a red tag. The house is officially condemned as uninhabitable until all violations are corrected. She has 48 hours to vacate. Michael Reeves, my attorney, spoke up. And my client? The licensing board will review his violations from 2015. He'll face fines and likely suspension, but he came forward voluntarily with documentation. That counts for something. Over the next week, Michael negotiated my penalties with the Tennessee Board for licensing contractors. The board suspended my general contractor's license for 90 days. 3 months during which I couldn't take new projects or perform work requiring a licensed contractor. I could finish ongoing projects under supervision, but I couldn't bid new work. The board also fined me $12,000 for the violations I'd agreed to in 2015. Each skipped inspection, each substandard material, each code violation I'd implemented at Margaret's direction carried a fine. Finally, I was required to complete a 40-hour professional ethics course before my license could be reinstated. It was painful, expensive, humiliating to have my license suspended, to have disciplinary action noted on my contractor record, to explain to clients why I couldn't start their projects until January. But it was also fair. I had broken the rules. I had compromised my professional obligations. I deserved consequences. Margaret's consequences were catastrophic. The county building department issued a correction order requiring $142,000 in structural, electrical, and plumbing repairs before the house could be reoccupied. Every violation had to be corrected by licensed professionals with proper permits and inspections. The basement bedroom and bathroom she'd added in 2018 had to meet current code, which meant proper egress windows, correct electrical installations, updated plumbing. Cost $34,000. The garage conversion from 2020, the fire-rated wall had to be rebuilt. The space had to be restored to code-compliant garage specifications or properly permitted as living space. Cost $18,000. The original 2015 violations, every wall-hiding substandard work had to be opened. Every structural element had to be brought to code. Every electrical and plumbing system had to be re-inspected. Cost $90,000 minimum, potentially $120,000 depending on what they found when walls opened. But the financial costs were only the beginning of Margaret's nightmare. The Davidson County District Attorney opened an investigation into permit fraud. Margaret had done major renovations, basement finish, garage conversion, without pulling permits, without inspections, without following any legal procedures. In Tennessee, that's a Class A misdemeanor, punishable by fines up to $10,000 and up to 11 months in jail. Because she'd signed change orders approving code violations during original construction, the DA was also reviewing potential charges for conspiracy to violate building codes and fraud in construction contracts. Those were more serious charges that could result in felony convictions. Her homeowner's insurance company, State Farm, dropped her coverage immediately upon receiving notice of the condemnation and code violations. Insurance companies won't cover homes with known code violations. Too much liability. Margaret was completely uninsured while facing $142,000 in required repairs. The civil lawsuit she'd filed against the HOA board was dismissed with prejudice. Her attorney, Richard Sullivan from Barnes & Sullivan Real Estate Law, withdrew from the case the day the condemnation notice was issued. He filed a motion to withdraw citing irreconcilable differences with client and facts that make continued representation untenable. Translation: he'd realized his client was suing people while living in a condemned house full of code violations she'd personally approved, and he wanted no part of the professional embarrassment. The neighborhood found out within 24 hours. In suburban HOAs, news travels faster than electricity. By the evening of October 16th, everyone in Willow Creek Estates knew that Margaret Foster, the iron-fisted HOA president who'd filed 67 violation notices in 9 months, who terrorized residents over grass height and garden gnomes, was living in a condemned house that had been red-tagged by the county. The change orders were organized chronologically in a 3-ring binder, each one documenting a decision Margaret had made during construction. I'd kept them as protection, CYA documentation, in case she ever tried to blame me for problems. Now they were going to be my weapon. I reviewed every page. Change order number 12. Margaret demanding we reduce the size of foundation footings to save $4,200 on concrete. Change order number 18. Skipping the final electrical inspection because the licensed electrician I'd hired was too slow and she'd found an unlicensed worker who could finish faster for half the cost. Change order number 23. Using cheaper lumber for roof trusses than engineering specs called for because nobody looks at the attic anyway. Every single page had her signature. Every single page documented her knowingly approving work that violated Tennessee building codes. Every single page proved that the violations in her house weren't mistakes or oversights. They were deliberate decisions she'd made and forced me to implement. I made copies of everything. Then I called the Davidson County Building Department and requested a meeting with the chief building inspector. His name was Robert Harrison, 30-year veteran of county building enforcement, the kind of inspector who'd seen every shortcut, every code violation, every contractor trick in the book. I'd worked with him on dozens of projects over the years. He knew my reputation. He knew I built quality work. I sat down in his office in September 2024 with my binder of change orders and told him everything. Told him about building Margaret's house in 2015, about the shortcuts she'd demanded, about the inspections we'd skipped, about the violations I'd agreed to because I needed the work. Told him I knew I was implicating myself, that I could face fines or license suspension, but that I couldn't let her destroy my business while sitting in a house built on violations she'd forced. Robert listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he sat back in his chair and looked at me for a long moment. "Daniel, you know you should have walked away from that project." "I know." "You know you violated your license obligations by agreeing to those shortcuts." "I know." "You know I could refer this to the state licensing board." "I know, but she's suing me now, trying to destroy my business, claiming I'm operating illegally. And she's doing it from a house that's full of code violations she personally approved. That's not right." Robert flipped through the binder, pausing on certain pages, reading Margaret's signatures, studying the technical details. Finally, he looked up. "I'm going to inspect that house," he said, "and if I find what you say I'm going to find, there are going to be consequences for both of you. You understand that?" "I understand." "You'll probably face fines, maybe license suspension pending review." "I know." "Why are you doing this?" I thought about that question. Why was I willing to destroy my own career to expose Margaret's violations? Was it revenge, justice, self-defense? Because she's trying to ruin me for running a legal business while she's living in a house built on fraud, I said finally. Because 8 years ago, I made mistakes because I was afraid of losing work, and I've been carrying that guilt ever since. Because I'm done being afraid of people like her. Robert nodded slowly. "I'll need to coordinate with the fire marshal, the electrical inspector, and possibly a structural engineer. This is going to take a few weeks. Take whatever time you need." 3 weeks later, on October 15th, 2024, Robert Harrison and a team of county inspectors showed up at Margaret Foster's house with an inspection warrant. I wasn't there. Robert had told me to stay away, that my presence would only complicate things. But I got a phone call from Robert 3 hours after the inspection started. "Daniel, you need to come down to the county office tomorrow morning, and you should probably bring a lawyer." "How bad is it?" "Worse than your change orders indicated. We found violations you didn't even know about. This house is a disaster." Margaret's house was condemned the next day. The inspection report was 47 pages long. I read it in Robert's office with my attorney sitting beside me, and it got worse with every page. The structural violations I documented were there. Undersized support beams, inadequate foundation footings, roof trusses not to spec. But the inspectors had found additional problems. The electrical work done by Margaret's unlicensed worker had created fire hazards in 3 rooms, wiring not to code, junction boxes improperly covered, circuit breakers undersized for the load. The plumbing had been installed without proper permits and had ventilation issues that could lead to sewer gas buildup. Most damning, the inspectors had found evidence that Margaret had done additional unpermitted work after moving in. She'd finished her basement in 2018 without permits, adding a bedroom and bathroom that violated egress requirements and had electrical work that was flat out dangerous. She'd converted part of her garage into a home gym in 2020, also without permits, removing a fire-rated wall that was required by code. The house wasn't just built wrong, it had been modified wrong, and all of it was on Margaret. Robert issued a red tag, official notice that the house was uninhabitable until corrections were made. Margaret had 48 hours to vacate. My attorney negotiated my penalties over the next week. The licensing board suspended my contractor's license for 90 days. And fined me $12,000 for the violations I'd agreed to in 2015. It was painful, expensive, and humiliating. But it was also fair. I'd broken the rules. I deserved consequences. Margaret's consequences were far worse. The county building department issued a correction order requiring $142,000 in structural, electrical, and plumbing repairs before the house could be reoccupied. Every wall we'd closed in 2015 had to be opened. Every skipped inspection had to be completed. Every violation had to be corrected by licensed professionals. But that was just the beginning. The Davidson County District Attorney opened an investigation into permit fraud based on Margaret's unpermitted basement and garage work. She'd done major renovations without pulling permits, without inspections, without following any proper procedures. That's a misdemeanor in Tennessee, punishable by fines up to $10,000 and possible jail time. And because she'd signed change orders approving code violations during original construction, she was potentially liable for fraud and conspiracy to violate building codes, serious charges that could result in criminal prosecution. Her homeowner's insurance company dropped her coverage immediately upon learning about the unpermitted work and code violations. No insurance company will cover a house with known code violations. Margaret was on her own for the repairs. The HOA lawsuit she'd filed against me was dismissed with prejudice. Her attorney withdrew from the case the day the condemnation notice was issued, probably recognizing that continuing to pursue a lawsuit while her own house was condemned for code violations was career suicide. The neighborhood found out within days. In suburban HOAs, news travels at the speed of gossip. Margaret Foster, the iron-fisted HOA president, who'd filed 67 violation notices in 9 months, who'd terrorized residents over grass height and garden gnomes, was living in a condemned house full of code violations she'd personally approved. The irony was too perfect. The schadenfreude was immediate and widespread. Margaret tried to fight the condemnation, hired a structural engineer to argue the violations weren't serious, hired a lawyer to claim the county inspection was politically motivated, showed up at county commission meetings demanding the red tag be lifted. Nothing worked. The violations were documented, photographed, and unambiguous. She moved out of her house in October 2024 and into a rental property. Started getting quotes for the repairs. The lowest bid was $138,000. The highest was $167,000. Every contractor she called looked at the scope of work and warned her that opening walls would probably reveal more violations, that the final cost could easily exceed $180,000. Margaret couldn't afford it. She'd spent most of her divorce settlement buying the lot and building the house in 2015. She'd spent more on the unpermitted renovations. She didn't have $150,000 liquid to spend on repairs. In December 2024, she put the house on the market, listed it at $520,000 with full disclosure of the condemnation and required repairs. Real estate agents told her buyers would deduct repair costs from any offer, that she'd be lucky to get $350,000 for a condemned house. She got one offer, $315,000 from a house flipper who planned to do the repairs and resell. Margaret had paid $480,000 for the lot and construction in 2015 to 2016. She was losing $165,000. She accepted the offer in January 2025. The HOA board held an emergency meeting in February 2025 and voted unanimously to remove Margaret as president, not because of the code violations, that was between her and the county, but because she'd filed a frivolous lawsuit using HOA funds and had created legal exposure for the organization. The board wanted her gone. Margaret resigned from the HOA board entirely rather than face a formal removal vote. Moved out of Willow Creek Estates in March 2025. I heard later she'd relocated to Kentucky, trying to start over somewhere her reputation hadn't preceded her. I completed my license suspension in January 2025, paid my fine, took a professional ethics course required by the licensing board, got my license reinstated with a notation on my record that I'd violated code in 2015. It hurt professionally. Some clients didn't want to work with a contractor who'd been disciplined. My business took a hit, but I survived. More importantly, I was no longer carrying the weight of those violations. I'd confessed, faced consequences, and moved forward. The story spread through contractor circles across Nashville. Other contractors who'd been pressured by clients to cut corners, who'd made similar compromises, who'd been carrying similar guilt, they reached out. We started talking about client pressures, about the impossible position contractors get put in when clients demand work that violates code but threaten to take their business elsewhere. I started teaching an evening class at the local community college, Ethics and Law for Construction Professionals, teaching young contractors what I'd learned the hard way, that no job is worth your license, that documentation protects you, that walking away from a bad client is always better than compromising your principles. Today, I'm 47 years old and still running Cooper Construction. My business is smaller than it was before the suspension, but it's better. I only take clients who respect the process, who understand that building codes exist for safety, who don't ask me to cut corners. And I have a new policy. If a client asks me to skip an inspection, reduce structural specifications, or do anything that violates code, I walk away immediately. No exceptions, no compromises, no second chances. Margaret Foster taught me that lesson the expensive way. She forced me to make choices I regret, then tried to destroy me when those choices came back to haunt her. In the end, we both paid for those violations, but she paid far more because she never took responsibility for her own decisions. Here's what I want other contractors to understand. When a client pressures you to violate code, document everything. Every conversation, every email, every text message where they ask you to cut corners. Because years later, when they've forgotten their own demands, those documents might be the only thing standing between you and career destruction. And here's what I want homeowners to understand. When you pressure your contractor to skip inspections or cut corners to save money, you're not just risking your house. You're risking their license, their livelihood, and their professional reputation. You're making them choose between their ethics and their economic survival. And if you ever become their enemy, those shortcuts you demanded will become your nightmare. Margaret Foster spent 8 years living in a house built on violations she'd approved. Then she became HOA President and decided to attack the contractor who'd built it. She thought he'd be too afraid to fight back, too worried about his own liability to expose what she'd forced him to do. She was wrong, and that mistake cost her $165,000, her HOA presidency, and her reputation in a community she'd tried to control. I'm not proud of the violations I agreed to in 2015. I'm not proud that I compromised my principles because I needed the work. But I am proud that I finally stood up to someone who thought she could bully me into silence while benefiting from the very violations she was using as a weapon. Sometimes justice takes 8 years. Sometimes documentation saves your career. And sometimes the best revenge is just telling the truth. If you're dealing with HOA harassment or clients who pressure you to violate building codes, share your story in the comments below. If you're a homeowner, think twice before demanding your contractor cut corners, because those corners might cut you later. And if you're a contractor facing impossible client demands, remember, no job is worth your license, your reputation, or your integrity. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories about standing up to people who think rules don't apply to them. Because Margaret Foster learned what happens when you attack someone while standing in a house built on your own fraud. The house was condemned, the HOA president was removed, and the contractor who built it finally got his reputation back by doing the one thing Margaret never expected, telling the truth. Remember, sometimes standing up to neighborhood tyrants doesn't just save yourself, it saves everyone around you. When good people refuse to be intimidated by fake authority, entire communities can break free from fear. Thanks for watching HOA Revenge Stories, where we prove that every HOA Karen eventually meets their match.